Hi, my name is Kyle Botter, and the topic of today's short video is why you should indulge in nostalgia. So, sometimes people think of nostalgia as a bad thing. Nostalgia is basically looking back on your past, reflecting on things that have happened to you a long time ago, and usually you get a sense of personal comfort from this. So you could think of people thinking of the music from their youth. Maybe it's a baby boomer who would think back to the 1970s with Boston and Aerosmith and think back on these songs and listen to them and feel good. Or maybe it's a Gen Xer listening to Nirvana or the Smashing Pumpkins, and it takes you back in time to a place in your life when you were younger, and sometimes you had less responsibility, and you generally feel good indulging in these things that make you reflect on your past. Nostalgia actually was originally thought of as a bad thing. Back in the 1600s, it was coined as the Swiss disease because so many Swiss soldiers would go and fight in other countries, and they would be depressed and mope around and sing old songs of their home in Switzerland. And people thought of it as sort of like a negative condition that they were constantly thinking back to Switzerland, and it made them feel bad. And then later it became medically diagnosed as basically a clinical issue that if a person's nostalgic, they're not feeling very good and they're reflecting too much on the past, and this is a negative thing. But actually, what research has shown over the last few years is that nostalgia is actually a positive thing. It tends to elicit positive emotions in people, tends to make them feel better, and it also tends to bring a sense of meaning to a person's life. And how this works is that when you reflect back on the past, it takes you out of the chaos and randomness of the present moment and puts you into a past that seems more understandable, more like you can remember what it was like to be there, and where the world made a little bit more sense. Because if you think back to the past, the story of what was written at that point in time is over. The story's long over. It's almost like rewatching an old movie. If you rewatch The Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter or Die Hard, you might rewatch the same movie over and over and over, and you know how it's going to go. You know exactly what's going to happen. Well, it's kind of the same with nostalgia. When you think back to, the 1970s or the 1960s, we know what happened. Everything was very concrete and things happened in a specific order, and you can always reflect back on what happened. Whereas the present moment, as it was being experienced, was pretty chaotic, and it continues to be chaotic. I'm making this video in 2026, and for many, many people, they think, how could you ever be nostalgic for 2026? How could you ever think of 2026 with all of its chaos politically, socially, technologically, economically? All these major issues are happening. How could you ever reflect on it positively? Well, I'm here to tell you that the youth that were born in 2026 or even earlier, they are going to think of 2026 positively. They are going to be nostalgic for it because people tend to be nostalgic for their childhood. Even if many, many negative things are happening, people will look back on their past and it will give them a sense of comfort. But to get back to the title of this video, why you should indulge in nostalgia, basically we've found through research that nostalgia has so many positive applications for a person's life. And when you think back on it, it's not inflicting something negative on you, but it's actually bringing these positive things to the forefront of your mind. You're reflecting on how you used to be when you were younger, when the world made more sense, and with it, there are these positive emotions that are correlated with these experiences you've gone through. And another thing is that it tends to connect you socially. So when you think back nostalgically, a lot of people won't just think back to a song, but they'll think back to like, oh yeah, I remember running around with my childhood friends while this was playing on a radio on someone's front porch, and it brings me back to that moment. Or I remember in the 1980s when I hung out with my friends at the mall, and then we'd listen to Tears for Fears at that time. And so the music would kind of bring them back to that moment, and it would bring them back to a community they were part of and a social system, and they were connected to many people. So nostalgia doesn't tend to isolate you, but tends to connect you to the people that were important to you at a specific point in time. And also, a very clear takeaway is that it says, okay, I had these people at this point in my life. Now, who are the people presently? And so it's this shift where nostalgic thinking gets you oriented away from the individual, closed off, isolated sense of self, and connects you to all the people around you that can make life important. And so this might actually, like, if you're nostalgic, you might think back to an old buddy that you hung out with 20 years ago, and then this might actually get you to message this person again and be like, oh, hey, do you remember back when we used to hang out, how fun that was, blah, 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 this happened. And so it can connect you to someone else. And I'll say, if you're liking this video so far, please like and subscribe, as it's the only way for me to get my channel to grow. So thank you very much. Nostalgia connects you to other people. Nostalgia doesn't just isolate you, but it gets you thinking about people that were important to you in your life. And it can also connect you to people in your past who were important to you. You might think of your grandparents or your parents or an older uncle or aunt or cousin or friends or an old youth leader or someone like that that was really important to you at a specific point in your time, and can get you to almost feel like that connection is still there. I know for myself, I'm a very, very nostalgic person, and I indulge in nostalgia pretty much constantly. I'm almost always listening to old video game music when I'm studying. I listen to music from the Nintendo 64, the PlayStation 2, GameCube, because I like having this in the background, because not only is it calming, but it's also something that gets me thinking of, in my mind, what was a simpler time, and a time where I experienced a lot of positive emotions. As a kid, I was a huge gamer. I was really into the Nintendo 64. And so these songs that I can return back to are really imprinted into my mind, and they're very visceral. And when I think back on these songs, I might think back and all these emotions that came with me being a child experiencing these video games, you know, a sense of awe and wonder and curiosity and adventure. All these things come back to the surface, and maybe I just listen to them, you know, in the background, but they give me a little bit of that emotion that I felt as a kid. I can never completely go back there. And maybe that's part of the sadness of nostalgia as well. Nostalgia is not just totally positive. It's got a slight twinge of bitterness to it. It's bittersweet. And you can hear this in a lot of songs that incorporate something called a major 7 chord, where it's almost entirely major, but there's the seventh that kind of just adds a slight tinge of sadness to it, a little bit of wistfulness, a little bit of longing for something. When you think back nostalgically, it's true that you can never go back to the past, and that so there's that little bit of sadness because you're remembering home, you're remembering a feeling of peace, but you're always slightly separated from it. You can never go back there completely. For me, I can listen to Nintendo 64 music, or the music in the 2000s of my teenage years, or even in the 2010s when I was first in university, millennial music, and I can think back to it and I can experience those emotions again, but there's always going to be that slight remove from these things. You're never going to quite go back there. And so there is that potential for a little bit of sadness in there. But the overwhelming feeling of nostalgia is one of grounding, and really it is like going back home. It's like after, you know, you've taken part in the chaos and brutality and cruelty and sadness and difficulty of the modern world, you can kind of come back home, and you can kind of put on that old blanket and watch your favorite movie that you had as a kid, or listen to the favorite music that you experienced when you were younger, and it can tell you just for a second that maybe life, there's more to it than just the chaos and competition of the modern world. And really the truth is that time keeps progressing, but this nostalgia keeps progressing as well. Like I said, those youth that are growing up in the 2020s are going to see this as a nostalgic time. They're going to listen to these new artists like Sabrina Carpenter and Chappell Roan, and they're going to think back on them nostalgically. They're going to think, oh, wasn't life so much better back when these artists were popular? And the truth is, you need to take a look at life for what was actually happening. Nostalgia goggles don't actually tell you a lot about how the world actually was, but it can give you a slice of a simpler time and make you feel a little bit more positive, but just keep it grounded in reality and remember what was actually happening at the time and that things aren't as simple as nostalgia tends to show you. But I will say you should indulge in nostalgia and you should incorporate it into your life and not feel bad about it, not feel bad about watching those old movies that make you feel comfortable. So thank you very much for watching, and if you like this video, please like and subscribe. Leave a comment if you have your own nostalgic ideas or something that gives you nostalgia, and share this to somebody else if you think it might benefit them. So thank you very much.